Okay, here we go for lesson 2, unit 11. And we are going to learn about the substitution method. So I'm playing The Who, Substitute, that song. Want to look that up? Classic rock song. I'm going to be eating Cheez-Its. So, substitution method is, if necessary, we want to solve one of the equations for one of its variables. Okay, little asterisk, we're going to say when possible substitute. We'll turn that off now. So when possible, solve for a variable that has a coefficient of 1 or negative 1. We'll talk about why that's important. It'll make it much easier. So step 1, we're going to solve for one of the equations for one of its variables, x or y. Then we are going to substitute that expression from step 1 into the other equation. And we're going to solve the equation. Okay, then we're going to substitute again. We're going to substitute the value from step 2. When we solve, we're going to substitute that value and solve for the other variable. Okay, so we can start different ways, but we're going to get the same result at the end. So let's do one here. So what we're going to do is we're going to solve this linear system. It's a linear system by using substitution. Lesson 1, we did graphing. We're going to check our solutions. We know how to check those. So we're going to take that ordered pair and plug it back in. Make sure it works in both. So I'm going to substitute. I got to solve for one of the equations for one of its variables, if necessary. This is already solved for y. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it in the second equation where I see y. Or if you want to highlight, I'm going to highlight that y and I'm going to plug that in. Okay? That's what we're going to do. We're going to substitute this for the y. So that's step 1. We really don't have step 1 here because we're already solved. So we can start on step 2. We have x plus 3 times y equals 5. But y we're going to substitute in 2x minus 3. So I took this right here, substituted it in for y. Okay, now we're going to solve. I see some parentheses, I got to take care of that. So this x is plus 3 times 2x is 6x. 3 times negative 3, we got to make sure we distribute to everything, is a negative 9 equals 5. Now we're just going to solve equations. So we're going to collect all the x's on one side. I got 7x over here. I'm going to add 9 to both sides. I get 7x equals 14. X equals 2. Okay? So now I have x equals 2. So my x is going to be 2. I'm going to check that later. I have to solve for my y now. So if I have x, I take it and I plug it in. I substitute it into the other and solve for the other variable. So I take x and I plug it into any equation I want. I'm going to solve for y, so I'm going to use this equation right here. Y equals 2x minus 3. Now I'm going to take this x and I'm going to substitute it in right there. So y equals 2 times 2 minus 3. 2 times 2 is 4 minus 3, which is 1. So I got my x is 2 and my y is 1. Now I want to check it. So how do we check it? We plug it into each equation. So I'm going to check it in the first one. I say 1 equals 2 times 2 minus 3. 2 times 2 is 4, minus 3 is 1. It checks there. Second equation, I want to check it in. So I want to say that this is x, so it's 2 plus 3 times 1 equals 5. 2 plus 3 equals 5. 5 equals 5. It checks. That's my solution right there. So, substitution method. First step, we solve for one of the variables. Sometimes it's already solved. Y is by itself. That's solved for one of the variables. So I take that and I substitute it into that second equation wherever I see y. So box the y and box what y equals and plug it in. We solve for x now because we have an equation with just x's. Then I take that x and I plug it back into the other equation right here to solve for y. And then I want to check them. Okay? So let's do number 2. Let's see, do I have one of the variables solved for? Yes, I have x solved for. X is all by itself. So I'm going to take x now, this, and substitute it in for x right there. So it always doesn't have to be y, it could be x. So now, first step is already done really. So now I'm going to take this and plug it in. So I take y equals 2 times x minus 2. But what's going to be x? 1 minus y. So I know I did this step right when I have all y's or all x's in this step right here. Because now I can solve this equation. So y equals 2 times, I got to distribute this 2, is 2 minus y minus 2. I'm going to add 2y to both sides. Okay? So 2y plus y is going to be 3y. And then 2 minus 2, I'm going to be left with 0 over here. So I divide by 3 and I get y equals 0. So now I have my y. I'm going to write it up here, 0. I have to find my x. So I'm going to take this y, I'm going to plug it back in right up here. This already says x equals 1 minus y. So I'm going to say x equals 1 minus, I'm going to take this, plug it in right here, 0. So x equals 1. So now let's double check this. Here's my first equation, x equals 1 minus y. I'm going to plug these both in. So x is 1 equals 1 minus 0. 1 equals 1. That checks. I'm going to check in my second equation. Y equals 2x minus 2. So y is 0. 2 times 1 minus 2. 0 equals 2 times 1 is 2. Minus 2 is 0. 0 equals 0. It checks. So that's how we use substitution to solve a system of linear equations. Okay, we substitute. Make sure we're solved for that variable. Then we substitute it in to the other equation and solve. And whatever variable we solve for, we plug it back into the other equation and get that other variable. Okay, let's do another example. So sometimes we've been skipping step 1 because it's already been done. But now I'm going to look at this system, these two equations, and neither of them is solved. So I have to solve for one of those equation variables. So I'm going to take this one. I'm going to look for the ones that have a coefficient of 1 or negative 1 to solve for. Okay? Somebody else could solve for x down here or y, but I'm going to solve for y right up here. So I'm going to rewrite this equation in step 1. Negative 5x minus y equals 12. I'm going to try and solve for y. So I would add 5x to both sides. I get negative y equals 5x plus 12. I'm just going to put the x in the front. Okay? I don't have y by itself. I got this negative hanging out here. So I got to divide by a negative 1, divide by a negative 1, each piece. So I get y equals negative 5x minus 12. Okay? Now, step 1, I have this y solved for here. I'm going to take it, since I used this equation to solve for y, I have to use the other equation to plug in. So I'm going to take it and plug it into this equation right here. So, 3x minus 5 times y equals 4. I'm using this equation right down here. Well, what's y? Y we're solved in terms of x. It's negative 5 minus 12. Okay, now I got to solve. I have all x's. I'm going to solve for x. 3x minus 5 times a negative 5x is plus 25x. Negative 5 times negative 12 is plus 60, and it equals 4. Let's get all our x's together. 3x plus 25x, 28x. I'm going to subtract 60 over to the other side. I'm not going to write that step. You guys are experts at that. So 4 minus 60, negative 56. I'm going to divide by 28. I get x equals negative 2. So x equals negative 2. I need to find y. I'm going to take this x and I'm going to plug it into any equation I want. So I'm going to, let's see, so let's plug it into this top equation right here. So negative 5 times x, but I'm going to put a negative 2 in, minus y equals 12. So now I can solve for y. So I get positive 10 minus y equals 12. I'm going to subtract 10. I get negative y equals 2. And then I'm going to divide by a negative 1, and I get y equals negative 2. So I get negative 2, negative 2. Let's make sure we didn't make an error here. We want to check this. Okay? So let's check. I'm going to check in negative 5x minus y equals 12. I'm going to plug negative 2 in here. Negative 5 times negative 2 minus a negative 2 equals 12. Negative 5 times negative 2 is 10. Plus 2, that turns into a positive. So I get 12 equals 12. That checks. It has to check in both equations. So I'm going to rewrite this equation right here. And now I'm going to check negative 2 again. So I get 3 times negative 2 minus 5 times negative 2 equals 4. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. Negative 5 times negative 2 is a positive 10 equals 4. Negative 6 plus 10 gives me a positive 4, which equals positive 4. That checks. Good solution. Okay, so this one we didn't have step 1 done. We had to solve for one of the variables. I chose to solve for y because it had a negative 1 as a coefficient. Much easier to do. All right, so let's try number 4. We got 2 more examples to do here.